It ain't the left side or the right side, then it must be the fin side. It ain't the left side.
Thank you, Solo D. Welcome to another episode of On the Fin Side here with Kat and Paul. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Spreaker, iTunes, YouTube, iHeartRadio, and on Spotify. Check out our merch store on thefinside.threadless.com. Here we are on NFL Draft Week, and Paul and I are continuing to go through position by position. And here we're talking about the interior defensive linemen here. So the defensive tackles, they may blend into some other conversations because sometimes it's hard because defensive tackles can play defensive ends in certain fronts. Defensive ends can play linebacker. You know how that whole thing goes. But this is a stocked defensive tackle group here. I mean, right now as we're broadcasting this and taping this, Quinnen Williams is projected to be a top 3 pick. And at this point, too, I don't see Ed Oliver getting out of the top 5. I mean, the Bucs are very interested. The Jets are being projected by Daniel Jeremiah to be taking a look at Ed Oliver, too. It's starting to look like a pipe dream that he falls to the Dolphins at that 13th spot. But you are starting to see players like Christian Wilkins from Clemson, Dexter Lawrence from Clemson, Jerry Tillery from Notre Dame, and Jeffery Simmons from Mississippi State falling to the Dolphins at 13 or even being options in trade down for them. Paul, in this first round, if the Dolphins stay at 13 or they trade down late into the first round, which players are you looking at and which direction do you hope the Dolphins are going to go?
So there's a couple things I really want to say on that. One thing that really stands out to me and a thought that's occurred to me while doing some film study is there's a lot of Clemson front in this first round. And as we move along, and we're going to talk about that a little more too in our edge segment as well. I almost have to wonder, as good as I think these guys are, if we'll see a little bit of slippage with them not playing with an all-pro line and being a little bit of the focus of an offensive front as they transition to the NFL level. So that should be intriguing to see. I'm not 100% sure that all of them are going to shake out, and that scares me a little bit. For me, too, one of the things that I like is the defensive tackle class is insanely deep. I mean, there are impact players up and down the board. I'd almost prefer, as much as I like some of these guys in the top end of the draft, that Miami look at the edge position or the offensive line position and fill a defensive tackle, that rotation, later in the draft, because they can get some really talented players as we go along.
Yeah, I think you could do it either way. I mean, at 13, you can fill that need with a player like Christian Wilkins, or, it might be a little bit too early for Dexter Lawrence or Tillery or Jeffery Simmons, but you could certainly trade down and still get one of those players. Or you can do what you said and take a look at a few players a little bit later in the draft in the 3rd or 4th round. I think you can do that too. You remember about 10 years ago, the Dolphins drafted Kendall Langford in the 3rd round. He became a 16-game starter. I think they're looking for a similar hole filler at that spot. So there are a lot of different ways that they can go at defensive tackle in this 3-man front. But circling back on the top group, Christian Wilkins expected to go somewhere in that 10 to 15 range. Incredibly mature, productive, improved every year there at Clemson. A very safe pick. I'll actually go back to something Simon Clancy said, who has the 3 Yards Per Carry podcast, is he's the Minkah Fitzpatrick version of a defensive tackle pick this year, and that's exactly right. Very safe guy, very good pick there. I wouldn't be too overwhelmed with him, though. I mean, I hope the Dolphins do end up having somebody fall to them, trade down, or go offensive line as opposed to that. But Wilkins is a consideration, very popular to the Dolphins here in mock drafts. Dexter Lawrence, his teammate, a freak. I mean, 342 pounds. He runs a 5 flat, 36 bench press reps. He did get suspended at the end of the year for steroids, but I think it was steroids. If not, I apologize for the misquote. But he was suspended at the end of the year, did not play in the bowl game. But that's really kind of a first-time offender type of thing for him. So we'll keep an eye on that. And Jeffery Simmons, 2 big things with him that are really going to cause some debate in war rooms is first he tore his ACL a month ago, and he's supposed to be out for the 2019 season, but man, oh man, was he a top 5 talent before that happened. And secondly, there's a bad video of him getting into a fight when he was 16. He ended up hitting a girl. It's not pretty to look at. And I want to watch my words carefully because other than that, Paul, he hasn't done anything since then. He's become a model person. And even with those things circling above his head, he's still getting first round consideration, not just from the Dolphins, but from a lot of teams here in the NFL.
Yeah, and I mean, I'd almost rather walk away with a Dexter Lawrence or a Jeffery Simmons and a Chris Lindstrom or a pick next year than I would with Christian Wilkins. I'd be just as enamored with that as I would, you know, the idea of even thinking about Christian Wilkins. As much as I do like the player, I just don't see a drop-off when you look at Dexter Lawrence and Jeffery Simmons. And if you're able to add a pick next year or able to add a Dalton Risner or a Chris Lindstrom in this draft or maybe an Andy Isabella, it's a no-brainer for me because that's 2 studs for the price of a pretty good player.
Yeah, and another player that I seem to like a lot more than other people, and I think you're on that same boat, Paul, is Jerry Tillery from Notre Dame. To me, the most underrated defensive player of this entire draft class. I mean, 6'7", 300 pounds, and you expect somebody like that to be a little bit lumbering, more of a power player. But, man, he is a body beautiful type of player. And Pro Football Focus actually ranked him as the best pass rushing interior defensive lineman this past year of this class. So I don't see a lot this guy is missing, and he could fit in perfectly as a 3-4 end.
I absolutely love Jerry Tillery. I know we talked about him off the air. He's a guy that he bursts off of his blocks. I think he ran a 4.93 if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, he's got great hand usage, and he does tend to get a little bit too engaged with the blockers at times. But if you watch, it's something I haven't seen before. He still manages to recover with his hands and get off the block and get to the play, even when he's a little bit too engaged, which is something I don't see very often. I mean, I'd love to see them clean that up a little bit and really turn him into a monster. But, I mean, he just reads and tracks the ball so well and just bursts off that block once he has the opening and once, you know, there's no other option for the person with the ball. I would have called him the most underrated, but there's another guy that I absolutely love that's down at the tail end of the draft, possibly even undrafted. I know I talked about him a little bit when we did our 7-round Dolphins mock, but P.J. Johnson, the JUCO transfer out of Arizona, they were really disappointed that they don't have him coming back this year to be the anchor of their defense as a whole. And as good as he was in the middle, their defense was even better when he went to the outside. I mean, the guy moves like a linebacker at defensive tackle and is just scary good, but he's under the radar a lot as a JUCO transfer with 1 year. So that's another guy I absolutely love, and he's another physical monster at 6'4", 325.
Yeah, somebody to keep our eye on there in the later rounds because, like you said, he is unheralded. But he does pack a lot of talent. I have liked what I've seen out of him, too. The Dolphins need some big bodies up front there. Going back to the first round, I mean, we've talked about really 7 defensive linemen that we are comfortable taking either at 13 or in a trade down scenario there. And then so you get to the second group of defensive players. One guy I'm not too high on is Draymond Jones from Ohio State. I think he's a fine player. He was great at Ohio State, too. I mean, this past year, 8.5 sacks, 13 tackles for loss. But to me, he's more of a stand-up how to phrase it is he stands up, he engages with the defensive lineman or with the offensive lineman, and his game is to just simply throw them out of the way. I don't think that's going to work at the NFL level, and I don't see somebody who's going to anchor particularly well. But if he can cut into the backfield, I think situationally he's got he's got some talent there. But he's projected as a second round pick right now. I would not go in that direction. Kalen Saunders is a player, again, I know we both like. I mean, he caught a lot of attention, Paul, by doing backflips at the Senior Bowl at 320 pounds. He made arrangements with his girlfriend beforehand that if the baby comes, then he's going to stay at the Senior Bowl and see the baby afterward to make sure that the baby has a good life based on his Senior Bowl. So I really like that whole story. I know you were high on him too.
Yeah, I mean, he is absolutely vicious at the point of attack. I mean, he throws people out of the way. You see him get double teamed and just blow through it. Great moves with his hands. Great rip move. I mean, he just drives people back, whether it's the blocker or when he makes a tackle. He never seems to fall over backwards. He's always got his head up, and I mean, he makes great reads on the ball. And once he gets a hold of somebody, they're not getting away. And his short area quickness, if you watch him, is outstanding. And despite the fact that he's 6'3", 323, I see him as a guy that could line up in the middle, could kick out to the edge in a 3-4, and is another movable chess piece, which is one of those things that any of our listeners, and I know you know, I love that with a defense. I'm not big on traditional. I'd rather just have it tailored to the strengths and weaknesses of the players, and the more things you can do with them, the better.
Well said. Yeah, Kalen Saunders, I'm very big on Senior Bowl week among linemen because that's a lot of times when they're going toe-to-toe with some of the best in the country, that's when you start to see some true colors there for the good and the bad. Another player, Tristan Hill from UCF, had an up-and-down career there. He's got some baby fat on him, but throughout this process has moved up into that second, third-round conversation from a late rounder. Can play in multiple schemes, kind of a big body that way too. Gerald Willis, as a lot of our listeners know from the University of Miami, 6'2", 302, has had some injury problems, but is working hard to get back into shape. Player I probably wouldn't look at to the later rounds. I'm not there on the third or fourth round grade that others are. Ronnell Wren is fascinating because he's 6'5", 320, but has, as Mike Mack used to say, he's all arms and legs at this point. So really a developmental kind of player, a mid-round maybe. Daniel Wise from Kansas, actually the younger brother of Patriots defensive lineman Dietrich Wise, who the Dolphins coaching staff interacted with a lot there with the New England Patriots. So interesting to see if he is on their board too. So you've got a lot of different scenarios here, Paul. Two other players worth mentioning, actually three. They might be 4-3 ends. They may be 4-3 defensive tackles. They could be 3-4 ends, but I'm going to mention them anyway. L.J. Collier from TCU, a powerful, low-to-the-ground, violent-handed 3-4 defensive end. Would be a steal in the third round. He'll probably go higher, but if he is there in the third round, I think that's an easy pick. Anthony Nelson, kind of a Henry Anderson type at 6'7", 270, where if you can get over how stiff and how angular he is, then he's somebody who could make a good fit there. And Charles Omenihu, I mean, I love this guy. Long arms, pushes his way to the quarterback with good technique, could be a steal late in the third round too. So it wouldn't surprise me either, Paul. I mean, with all these names that we're talking about, if the Dolphins double down on offensive linemen in the first two rounds, double down on, defensive line and edge in the third and fourth round.
No, not at all. I mean, there's a lot of players in the mid rounds at defensive tackle and even at edge that I think Miami could get a hold of and have them be immediate impact contributors. This draft is absolutely stacked. And if you look at Chris Greer's free agency plan, it looks like this is exactly what he was staring at when he made it. So kudos to him.
And that will do it for our breakdown of the defensive line, specifically the defensive tackle position, as we continue approaching our way to the NFL draft. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Spreaker, iTunes, YouTube, iHeartRadio, and on Spotify. Check out our merch store, too, on thefinside.threadless.com. If it's not on the right side and it's not on the left side, it is on the fin side. Solo D, take us home.
It ain't the left side or the right side, and it must be the fin side. It ain't the left side or the right side, and it must be the fin side. Listen, Dolphins fans across the land all tuning in to see what Brian Cat and Paul about